Aha, oh, okay, I see a few people are with me. Hello, guys. Sorry for the false start. Again, my name is Kathleen. If there's any friends and family out there watching, they might know me by Cassie. I answer to Kathleen, I answer to Cassie. Either is fine. Again, I work for Free Tours by Foot as a tour guide in New York City. I am broadcasting to you from my painting studio inside of my living studio in Washington Heights in New York City. Of course, we're on hiatus right now, unfortunately, as is most of the world, but we're doing this fun talk to a tour guide, ask a tour guide questions live thing every Tuesday, and I think most Thursdays as well. Just before I forget, if you want to support the guides while we're out of work, you can buy a gift certificate on the website. Or I believe my Venmo handle is down there underneath the video somewhere if you'd like to tip me. I know that a lot of us are hurting for money right now, so if that's not a possibility for a lot of you, please don't worry about it. We're just here to have a good time today. So hello, Washington Heights. Yes, Lin-Manuel Miranda grew up in this neighborhood. A couple of years ago when they were casting the movie, there were lines of kids outside one of the old theaters here. He actually auditioned the neighborhood kids to be in his movie, which I thought was really cool. My area of expertise is the Lower East Side. That includes the East Village and Alphabet City, if you're not familiar with New York City. But I do many tours all over Manhattan. I do some in Brooklyn. So I'm going to do my absolute best today to answer any and all of your questions. On the outside chance that I don't know an answer, and because I don't have the glamorous magnificence of New York City behind me today as I talk to you, I have brought a special guest. Let me just introduce you to my friend, Andy Warhol. Andy, say hello. I brought him here at great expense, and I have to tell you that he hasn't said a word since he got here. I don't know what to say about that. He's one of the most important, if not the most important artist of the 20th century in the US. So, I don't want to criticize him, especially when he's right here, but hopefully he'll chime in a few times today. We'll see if that happens. So let's see if anybody has any questions. I don't know. Do I need to turn it up? Maybe get closer to the microphone. Okay, let me know if you can hear me a little bit better. Sorry about that. Can you guys hear me a little better now? So let's see. I had a couple of people ask me questions ahead of time, just to kind of get the ball rolling. And my friend Farrell was asking me if I had one day in New York City, what would be the right thing to choose? And even though the East Village and the Lower East Side is my absolute favorite place, it's my favorite neighborhood, I think if I had never been here before, okay, I'll get to that in a second. If I'd never been here before, I think I would choose Greenwich Village or the West Village. It's the prettiest, just most iconic of the neighborhoods, and you don't really even have to have a plan when you go there. You can just wander around all day. Washington Square Park is kind of in the heart of it, and it's a beautiful park, and there's always something fun happening there, like there's always live music, maybe a couple of live musicians. There's a guy who lives in that neighborhood who wheels his piano on some days from his apartment to the park and plays. And then just a short walk away from Washington Square Park is Macdougal Street. And there's all kinds of wonderful food to be had on Macdougal Street. It is priced for the NYU students that live in that area. So it's all very inexpensive, and it's open very late, and there's something for every palate. So I would recommend wandering around the Greenwich Village or the East Village. And then when you get tired, you sit down in an outdoor cafe and you have a glass of wine or you have a coffee, and you people watch, which is just about the best activity that New York City has to offer. We are a city full of characters, myself being a proud character in New York City. What is a must-eat location in East Village? Oh my gosh, there's so many. I'm going to go with Strika. Strika is a tiny little hole-in-the-wall Ukrainian restaurant. It's affiliated with St. George's Ukrainian Catholic Church, which is just across the street. It's on 7th Street between Cooper, which is also the Bowery, and 2nd Avenue. You should Google it on your phone before you go, because you'll miss it otherwise. It's on the north side of the street, and you walk by and the letters are in Ukrainian. It's only open for lunch. It's open from 11 to 5, Wednesday through Sunday, but it is the most authentic, magnificent Ukrainian cuisine that you're going to get in the East Village, and it's my absolute favorite. And then I think the other thing you might enjoy is, Paul's de Burger Joint. Paul's de Burger Joint is on 2nd Avenue at St. Mark's Place. It's been there since 1989. It's an institution in the neighborhood, and it's just a really good traditional burger and fries. And then you can walk up and down St. Mark's Place, which is a really fun place to walk. What are my favorite tours to lead? My absolute favorite tour is a tour I do called Alternative New York. It's basically a historical tour of the East Village, and we really go in depth into the East Village. And the East Village is, I don't know. There's a rebellious river that runs underneath the East Village, and every crazy thing that's ever happened in New York City, from riots to artistic movements, happen in the East Village. And you've got St. Mark's Place, and you have Tompkins Square Park, St. Mark's and the Bowery Church, which is one of the oldest buildings in Manhattan. So that would definitely be my favorite tour. Let's see. Any other questions? Hello, DC. Yes, underground history. You know what? Let's talk a little bit about St. Mark's Place while we're on the subject of the East Village. So, and I have some visual aids. I don't know if they're going to work, but I'm going to try. So St. Mark's Place, if you've never been to New York City, and you kind of have like maybe a fantasy in your mind of what New York City looks like, I think probably what you're seeing in your mind's eye is St. Mark's Place. It's just that iconic, shabby chic strip. It's actually only a couple of blocks long. You'll find the Mosaic Trail on St. Mark's Place. The Mosaic Trail is a series of mosaics. Oh, I have a picture of that actually. All done by the same artist. His name is Jim Power. Let's see if you can see this. That's Jim Power there, and that's one of his beautiful mosaics. They're all made from found materials like broken cups from thrift stores, broken tiles from hardware stores. They're all East Village themed. Most of them are East Village themed. Some of them, all of them are New York City themed. And they're all on lampposts or planters because the idea was he wanted to take the anxiety out of city living. He's a Vietnam veteran. He came back from Vietnam with a little bit of PTSD, like a lot of combat veterans do. And he chose to work through his trauma by creating these beautiful pieces of public art. They're iconic in New York City. If you live here, you've probably walked by them a million times. I encourage you, when you come to visit, to go down to St. Mark's Place. They're all up and down that. Again, that's 8th Street. He's been working on them since the late 70s. He's kind of getting up there now, but I hope that he's able to finish them. He wants to complete 80 before he retires, and he's up to 70 now. Let's see, any other good questions? Off the beaten path attractions. Well, the first thing that comes to mind is the Manhattan Bridge. Everybody goes over the Brooklyn Bridge, and the Brooklyn Bridge is beautiful. It is a wonderful, iconic view. It is very crowded, though. The Manhattan Bridge offers similarly iconic views of Brooklyn, of Manhattan, of the beautiful skyline, and it's never as crowded. And if you walk it, if you start in Brooklyn, so for instance, you could go to Brooklyn and you could spend some time in Dumbo. That's where you pick up the pedestrian entrance to the bridge. And when you walk across, it lets you off in Chinatown. So you're right in Chinatown for some of the best food in the city. It lets you out right on Canal Street, which is like the main artery in Chinatown. It only takes about, if you really want to stroll leisurely, it's about 40 minutes. And if you're a photographer, some of the views of the graffiti on top of the buildings in Chinatown, the views are just breathtaking, and you'll have some really, really great pictures. Let me think if I can think of any other really off the beaten path things. A neighborhood that a lot of people don't go to is Hell's Kitchen. And Hell's Kitchen is a wonderful neighborhood to spend a day in. It's much more residential. It's gentrifying a little bit now, but it's much more residential than a lot of the neighborhoods. And a lot of people tend to stay in Midtown, like they stay in Times Square, which, by the way, if you can avoid staying in Times Square when you come to New York City, I recommend staying in other places. Times Square is, everybody needs to see Times Square. I don't want to tell you that you're going to come to New York City and not see Times Square, because you definitely need to see it. But it's much nicer to stay in a more residential or a little bit of a quieter neighborhood. But if you find yourself staying in Midtown, a great neighborhood to explore is Hell's Kitchen. If you walk south far enough in Hell's Kitchen to where you're up in the 30s, you're going to get to Hudson Yards, which is like the new playground there. That's where the vessel is, that weird honeycomb sculpture that you keep seeing on Instagram. So like a great off the beaten path day would be to start maybe at Worldwide Plaza on 50th Street, and then make your way west. And then when you get to like 10th Avenue, just start walking south until you get to the 30s. It's an interesting neighborhood. It's full of beautiful old late 19th century, early 20th century brownstones. It's full of history. If you're an Irish American, that used to be the neighborhood that was run by the Irish mob until about 1988. That area was run by the Irish mob. I'm not convinced they're gone, so like don't go to Hell's Kitchen and start bad-mouthing Mickey Spillane or anything. I wouldn't recommend that. And then make your way up to Hudson Yards, and if you're not too exhausted, at Hudson Yards you can pick up the High Line, that's the end of the High Line, and walk all the way to the Chelsea Market if you want to. Do you recommend Governor's Island? I like Governor's Island. I've only ever visited it in the summertime. Like in the summertime, there's all kinds of civic activities, like there's big concerts. They do this really cool, I can't think of the name of it, but it's like twice in the summer they do like a Great Gatsby Day, where people dress up like it's the 1920s, and they have a live like 1920s dance band, and it's an amazing amount of fun. And it's quiet. It has a much different vibe than the rest of the city because there's no car traffic. So it's very quiet. People are basically there to rest and relax. And in the summertime, it's really, really fun. What's my favorite museum? Oh, God, I don't know if I could pick a favorite museum, but I shall try. If you're a fan of modern art, I really like PS1, which is in Queens. It's in Long Island City in Queens. MoMA, of course, is the quintessential modern art museum, but PS1 is a part of MoMA, and it's where they showcase up-and-coming artists. So you're going to see like what's really on the cutting edge of the art scene in New York City and across the world if you go to PS1. And then also you're in Queens, so that's something cool to visit. Long Island City is very close to Astoria, and Astoria has some of the best Greek restaurants in the city, and also has some of the best waterfront. It's got like a really cool little waterfront park. And of course I like the Metropolitan Museum of Art, because who doesn't like the Metropolitan Museum of Art? There's something there for everybody. And I will tell you a secret that I tell every person who takes my tours and says that they like art. On Friday and Saturday nights, most of the year, every once in a while it's closed for like a private event, but most of the year, Friday and Saturday nights, the Met is open until 8:45. And they have live classical music. If you've ever been to the Met, there's this huge balcony right as you walk in, and they have a bar set up on the balcony, and they have, usually it's a string quartet playing classical music, and it rings out all across the museum. It's a very classy affair. You can get dressed up if you want to get dressed up. And it's about 60 to 70% less crowded than it is the rest of the day or the rest of the year. So I would recommend going to the Met and going to late night at the Met. That's like a really fun thing to do. Okay, so I have some other questions that people ask me. What is my favorite story? I mean, before I have like a list of questions. What is my favorite story to tell on my tours? And again, I'm going to go back to St. Mark's Place. So on St. Mark's Place, there is a building. It's 19 to 25 St. Mark's Place. This is what it looked like when it was built. This is actually a picture from the late 1800s. You can see that. It was built in 1831 when St. Mark's Place was a fancy address. Back in the early 1800s, as Manhattan was getting more and more full, wealthier people were being pushed uptown if they wanted to build bigger houses. In fact, if you would have come to the East Village in the early 1800s over on the Bowery, there would have been palatial mansions. None of those mansions are there anymore, but this building is from that era. It was built in 1831 as a ballroom back when it was like a fancy address. And then in 1900, as the demographics of the neighborhood had changed again, now we have German immigrants moving into the area, actually like in the 1840s. The East Village was part of what was called Kleine Deutschland, which was a huge German-speaking neighborhood. During that era, New York City had more native German speakers than any cities in the world outside of Berlin and Vienna, if you can believe that. And St. Mark's Place would have been lined with German-speaking businesses and German beer halls, and this ballroom became a wedding hall that you could rent out if you're a resident of Little Germany. And then in 1900, it changed hands to a Polish family, and they called it Dom, and it was a combination beer hall, dance hall, and meeting hall. And it was during that era in 1914 that there was a famous mafia shootout in front of the building between the Jewish mafia and the Italian mafia. The Jewish mafia at that time was being led by a man named Dopey Benny. This is his mugshot. That's Dopey Benny. He's kind of handsome in a bad boy sort of way, I think. He's called Dopey Benny because he has an congenital eye defect that makes him look sleepy, which kind of adds to the sex appeal, I guess. I mean, I guess all gangsters have a little sex appeal. Anyway, so he made a deal with the Italian mafia. Somehow it went awry, and there was a huge shootout on a spring day in 1914 right in front of Dom. They managed to completely miss each other, but a city councilman who was walking by had the misfortune to get shot and was killed. And this caused a big scandal for a couple of days because nothing will stop the juggernaut that is organized crime in New York City. And then in 1966, it was rented out by none other than Andy Warhol. Andy, do you want to talk about the Electric Circus? I don't think he has anything to say, unfortunately. Again, he's not being very vocal. But he's the genius. So originally it was called the Exploding Plastic Inevitable. This was the name of the club. This was in 1966. The East Village is an innovator in nightlife, like a worldwide innovator in nightlife. In fact, most New Yorkers, the only time we ever go down to East Village is to go to a club or to see a show. And I think that's why Alternative New York, which is my East Village historical tour, I get more native New Yorkers on that tour than any other tour I lead, because I think everybody that lives here is sort of curious about the neighborhood and the neighborhood's history. Anyway, so back to the Exploding Plastic Inevitable. So a lot of the things that we take for granted in nightlife were actually Andy Warhol's idea, and he was the first person to do a lot of these things. For instance, he had a different psychedelic film playing on every wall. On a good day, there would be circus performers, fire eaters, jugglers, sword swallowers. And during the day, members of the factory, that was the young people that he had helping him out create his art. The factory, by the way, was in Union Square. It had several locations around the city, but the most iconic location was right off Union Square Park. So members of the factory would go out and they would recruit interesting looking people to come up and join the party. And there were comfortable couches off the dance floor in case your experimentation with various substances made it so that the dance floor was a little too intense for you. You could go over to the comfy couches. Nico and the Velvet Underground were the house band at the Exploding Plastic Inevitable. If you've never heard of the Velvet Underground, Lou Reed was a part of the Velvet Underground. I have actually a picture of the dance floor. Here we go. This is the dance floor in the Exploding Plastic Inevitable. I'm sure the music playing was much cooler. If you've ever seen the film Midnight Cowboy, there is a scene in Midnight Cowboy that is based on the Exploding Plastic Inevitable. And if you watch the movie, and we all have this free time on our hands right now, so if you want to watch a great movie that's shot almost entirely in New York City, I highly recommend Midnight Cowboy. Prepare yourself, however, for one of the saddest endings in cinema history. It's such a sad ending, so get your Kleenex ready. But there's a scene in it that's based on the exploding plastic inevitable. In fact, there are members of Andy Warhol's factory and some of his movie stars that are in that scene. So it's well worth watching. Also, it has the iconic New York City scene when Dustin Hoffman is crossing the street and the taxi almost hits him. And he says, "I'm walking here, I'm walking here." That is also from Midnight Cowboy. That scene, by the way, was improvised. That taxi driver did not realize he was going to be in the most iconic New York City movie moment of all time. And I wonder if he was ever even compensated. I don't know. After a couple of years, Andy Warhol got bored with it. He passed the club off to some friends. They renamed it the Electric Circus, and it remained the most iconic nightclub in New York City until in 1970, there was a small bomb exploded on the dance floor. The culprits were never found, but it started to cause decline in membership, and it finally closed. And then the next really iconic nightlife spot was, of course, Studio 54, which opened, I think, in 1979. Let's see. Exploding Plastic Inevitable, yes. Velvet Underground, yes. How did I become a tour guide? Oh, that's a good question. An angel came, no. Well, I'm a performer. I do a lot of things. As you can see, I'm a painter, I'm a writer, and I'm a performer is primarily what I do, and I've done it all my life. And like most artists, I don't, make a full enough living as an artist. And so I was looking for something I could do for a living that would be fulfilling to me in some way, and not just a day job that I'm just doing for a paycheck. And I had some friends, some of whom were actors, and one of whom was a dancer, and they recommend that I try it. And so I started doing it, and I absolutely love it. It really, it incorporates a lot of the things that I love about being alive, meeting new people, telling stories, sharing stories. Theatrically, I like to think of it as, New York City is my backdrop. Sometimes New York City is a character in the story that I'm telling. So I absolutely love it. It's one of the best decisions of my adult life was becoming a tour guide. Okay, so let me just get some more questions from earlier. Oh, you know what else I forgot about on St. Mark's Place is Gem Spa. Anybody who visits St. Mark's Place, if you go to 2nd Avenue and St. Mark's, there's a place called Gem Spa. I got a little picture of this is what it looks like now. This is Gem Spa. These are cool people walking in front of Gem Spa. It doesn't look like much from the outside. It's just like another corner store that sells cigarettes and magazines and whatnot. But it has been in the East Village since 1927. And it is an iconic part of the East Village for a number of reasons. I need to take a sip of tea in my novelty. Excuse me. I got this in a thrift store. As you can see, there's New York City. My neighborhood, Washington Heights, would be up here somewhere on an even bigger novelty mug. No, Washington Heights, not important enough to be on a mug, I guess. Okay, so Gem Spa. So a number of reasons why it's so important. Yes, the egg cream, exactly. Gem Spa is the home of New York City's egg cream. What is an egg cream? Well, first of all, it doesn't have any eggs in it. Back in the early 20th century when they made downtown theater suggestions, I will get to that. I have many. I have so many. That's one of my favorite subjects. So back in the early 20th century when they were making chocolate syrup, they had to use raw eggs. So that's why it originally was called an egg cream. This is a Jewish heritage food. The East Village is part of the Lower East Side. There was a time when there were 500,000 Jewish people living on the Lower East Side. So when you visit the East Village, when you visit the Lower East Side, it's filled with all kinds of wonderful, iconic Jewish heritage food like bagels, some of the best bagels in the city, the best knish in the city over at Yonah Schimmel's on Houston Street. And then the egg cream, you can get it at a lot of places on the Lower East Side, but Gem Spa claims, and most of us believe them, that they are the original egg cream place, and they have the original recipe. In the 1950s, the little store was bought by 2 Jewish brothers, and they are the ones who named it Gem Spa after 2 of their wives and 1 of their ex-wives, Gertrude, Emma, and Miriam. And the spa part, I don't really know why it's called a spa. That's some sort of 1950s thing that's lost in the mists of time. Maybe somebody watching this knows the answer to that. And then in the 1960s, it was bought by an Italian family. And then in the 1980s, it was bought by an Indian family. They still own it. They're still operating it. In fact, they're working very hard to hold on to their lease right now, like a lot of the businesses in that area. So hopefully someday you will get to come to New York City, or New Yorkers watching. Please go into Gem Spa and get an egg cream, and let's help them stay in business. Another reason why it's so iconic to the East Village is because of its central location. So back in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, like when the Fillmore East was open, that was just down the street. The Bowery Ballroom is also not very far. So people would meet at Gem Spa and get an egg cream, and then they would go out into the rest of the East Village. Allen Ginsberg, who lived in the East Village for decades, called it the nerve center of the East Village. Okay, so somebody is asking downtown theater suggestions. I have so many. There's Joe's Pub and the Public Theater that are down there right on Cooper Street, right by the Cooper Union. Joe's Pub is sort of like a fancy cabaret. We have in New York City what I like to call cabaret with a capital C and cabaret with a little c. So cabaret with a capital C would be like Joe's Pub. You're going to see famous people get up and sing songs and tell amusing anecdotes in between. Yeah, I love Joe's Pub too. Like Sandra Bernhardt did a week there during the holidays. And then the Public Theater is considered an off-Broadway theater. I highly recommend you visit off-Broadway when you come to the city. Broadway, of course, is wonderful. You don't get a better experience in Broadway. But if you want to see things that are a little different, I highly recommend off-Broadway and off-Broadway, and what I like to call offity off-Broadway. What is offity off-Broadway? Well, this is my own term, but this refers to the sort of anything goes little venues where you pay $20 or $25 for a cover charge. Sometimes it's standing room only, and you don't know what you're going to see. My favorite of those places are the Slipper Room. That's on Orchard Street. It's almost in Nolita. It's kind of on the border between Nolita and the Lower East Side. The Slipper Room is the home of New York City's burlesque. And it's just a lot of fun. They do really bawdy things there. They're hilarious sometimes. Sometimes they do wonderful sort of artsy things. It's what I like to call a naughty good time. And actually, it was the Slipper Room that brought a lawsuit against the city back in the 1990s when city government was trying to... This is a story with two sides, because on the one hand, New York City was a very dangerous place. Something needed to be done about the crime. But on the other side, some of the things that the city went after were really cultural things. And one of those things was the city's nightlife. So there was an obscure cabaret law from the early 20th century that said if you had 3 people swaying to music, the city could shut you down and fine you $1,000 unless you had this special cabaret license, which almost nobody had. So what they did was they went around to the clubs that they wanted to shut down for whatever reason they wanted to shut them down. And if they didn't like you, they would fine you night after night after night until you were just forced to close permanently. And it was the little Slipper Room that brought a lawsuit in 1999 against the city saying that, we serve a purpose, we're a legitimate business, we have a right to stay open. And they won that lawsuit. And because of that, since 1999, New York City's nightlife has been making a return. Cafe Society. Yes, Cafe Society used to be where the Axis Theater is now. Axis Theater is a wonderful theater where you can see all kinds of, that's another great downtown theater. It's a small venue. They have really high production values, and they do really, really cool things there. It's owned and operated by Randy Sharp, who's a playwright in New York City who does amazing things. But originally it was the site of Cafe Society, and Cafe Society was one of the first nightclubs in the country that was integrated. It was not just like a fashionable, cool place to go. Everyone was welcome there. Gay people were welcome there as well. So it was like one of the first... La Mama, yeah. There's a whole stretch of East 4th Street that has a bunch of different theaters. La Mama is one of those theaters. If you're looking for something any of these places that I've mentioned would be amazing to go to. But if you're really looking for something cutting edge, La Mama is a little theater. that specializes in things that are a little different. My friend Edgar Oliver, who is a phenomenal and award-winning storyteller, he got his start really at La Mama and does a lot of shows at La Mama, so that's another great choice. There's Theater 80 on St. Mark's Place, Theater for the New City. Let's see. Yes, New York Theater Workshop is also on 4th Street. That's another good one. I'm just going to see how we're doing for time. Okay. Okay, so let's see. Other theater recommendations. There's another place, actually, that's almost, it's not quite brand new. It's called Dickson Place. That's on, it's very close to the Whole Foods on Houston Street. It's like just up the street. It's on, I think it's on Allen Street, actually. And Dickson Place specializes, I just saw a show there a couple of weeks ago, a friend of mine. They specialize in really up-and-coming artists looking to develop new shows, so that's another great place to see new things. There's a club called Caveat that's on 1st Avenue. Actually, I think it's Allen Street because it's below Houston Street. And they're sort of like comedy for the cool kids. Like if you've ever heard of the Upright Citizens Brigade, that's another, they have several locations around the city. And at Caveat or the Upright Citizens Brigade, you're never going to pay more than $20. Most of the cover charges are like $10 or $15. And you're likely to see somebody who's going to be on Saturday Night Live in a couple of years. So if you're a comedy fan, Caveat is a really great choice. Let me see. I have some other questions that people asked me before the tour. What else? Oh, improv theater suggestions. Oh my gosh, don't get me started on improv. Well, Upright Citizens Brigade is a really good one. There's several locations around the city. There's the People's Improv Theater. There's the Magnet. There's Gotham City Improv. All of those are really good. The Pit always has something interesting, and the Pit has 3 different locations around the city, and they're really cheap. If you're traveling to New York City on a budget, they have shows that are like $5 cover charges, and it can be a little bit hit or miss at those places, but again, people on Saturday Night Live right now, we're also doing shows at the Pit. So I just quickly want to answer this question earlier about if you only have a day in New York City. Another really great choice is, and I know it's cliche, but to walk across the Brooklyn Bridge. If you come from the Manhattan side and then walk to Brooklyn and really take your time, it's maybe 45 minutes to an hour. And that's like really walking at a leisurely pace. And when you get to the other side, it lets you out in very near Dumbo, where you can go to either Giuliana's or Grimaldi's, which is consistently voted the best pizza pie as opposed to pizza by the slice. You can't walk in and get a slice. It's like you have to sit down and get a whole pie. So a couple of things about walking across the Brooklyn Bridge. When you get towards the end, you're going to be offered 2 paths. One is like straight down and one goes to the left. Take the one to the left, and then when you walk down the little stairs, you're going to just turn right around, and on the opposite side of where you are, back towards the water, is the neighborhood of Dumbo. And Dumbo's like such a cool neighborhood. You could spend the whole day walking around in Dumbo. It used to be where all the factories and warehouses were, so it's these huge, iconic looking buildings that were mostly abandoned in the 1950s when New York City ceased to be a manufacturing capital. And it became kind of a dangerous area, but the abandoned buildings attracted artists, and artists started to move into the area in the 50s and 60s, and they were the ones who gave it the name Dumbo. Dumbo stands for Down Under the Manhattan Bridge Overpass. And the artists living there at the time in the 70s were so afraid of gentrification that they thought if they gave it like a silly name, it would detract or, deflect the real estate industry's interest. But of course, the opposite happened. A lot of those wonderful iconic buildings are now landmarked, though. So hopefully it'll continue to look like that. And again, you can visit Grimaldi's or Giuliana's. I have a great story to tell you about Grimaldi's, actually. Great New York City story. So Grimaldi's was opened by Patsy Grimaldi back in the early 1960s, and it quickly became a city favorite. And then in the 90s, he decided it was time for him to retire. So he sold the franchise to his friend Frank Cioli. And something happened a couple of years into the 90s, and Frank got on the wrong side of the people who owned the building. So they evicted him, and what he did was he went right next door to where an old abandoned bank building was. He remodeled it, and he moved Grimaldi's there, and that's where Grimaldi's is now. But just about the time that Frank Chioli opened Grimaldi's, Patsy Grimaldi decided to come out of retirement. He moved into the old building and opened a pizza restaurant called Giuliana's with basically the same food on offer. And now these guys don't speak to each other anymore. But the pizza is wonderful. So that's a really great day to walk across the bridge, wander around Dumbo a little bit. If you could go on a weekday, that's the best time to go, because if you go on the weekend, sometimes the lines are really intimidating. Best hidden gems. I don't feel like a lot of people make it over to the new Whitney. The Whitney opened a new location. I want to say it's either 2013 or 2015, right underneath the High Line. And I feel like it's it's a popular museum, but probably fewer people go there than the other museums. What else? On 2nd Avenue, there's a little restaurant called B&H Dairy. It's a tiny little hole-in-the-wall counter. It's been there since 1938. It is a kosher vegetarian restaurant where they make their own challah bread. And if you go during the lunch rush, it's packed with people, even though it's so small, because it's just a great New York City tradition. They will give you a big bowl of homemade split pea or lentil soup for $6 and then give you a big fat slice of that homemade challah bread with butter on it on the side for free. So that is a hidden gem. And then, if you really want to go off the beaten path, there's my neighborhood. I live in Washington Heights. Washington Heights has one of the most beautiful parks in all 5 boroughs, Fort Tryon Park. And inside of Fort Tryon Park is the medieval wing of the Met called the Cloisters. And that is a really cool day, especially if you come, obviously not this spring, but if you come in the fall when the leaves are changing. There's a gorgeous garden there called the Heather Garden. And it blooms from March to October. The people who take care of the garden just do a beautiful job, and you can walk around the garden, and then you can make your way lazily up the path to go to the cloisters. The famous unicorn tapestries are at the cloisters. Is there any way to hear more from me during this quarantine? Like everyone else, I'm so sorry. Someone is asking, is there any way to hear more from me in this quarantine? Yes, there is. Like everyone else, I am stuck in my apartment. You can find me on Instagram, Cassie Dougherty, KassiDougherty. I'm always up for a little chat. Like everybody, I'm looking for something to do. Maybe I can come back and do this again, and maybe next time I'll know how to do Facebook Live when I start doing a Facebook Live. Wouldn't that be nice? But you know what? It's just like when something goes wrong on the street when I'm tour guiding. It's all part of the show, folks. I have to tell you this story, especially because I know there's probably other guys watching. So, I'm so sorry. Excuse me. Allergies, everybody. I have seasonal allergies. Nobody get worried for me, especially my mom, if my mom is watching. 2 of my tours meet at Astor Place in front of a Starbucks. And Astor Place is kind of like sitting out on its own like a triangle. So when people come around the corner of the Starbucks, they just sort of appear, and sometimes it's a little jarring. So I was gathering my tour, getting ready to check my roster and make my introductions. And this guy just appears around the corner. Young man, maybe he was an NYU student, sort of reminded me of David on Schitt's Creek. He was very well dressed in like expensive clothes, and he had on this like neon yellow big baggy sweater, and he had on an earpiece. So I was hoping maybe he was talking on the phone to somebody, but he comes around the corner. Maybe he was under the influence of a substance. I don't know. But he comes around the corner shouting, "You trash people, you brought me here for this?" And I thought, is he talking to me? Is he talking to me? I didn't know. And I was just about, how you're trying to kind of gauge if somebody is going to maybe make trouble. And I was just about to say, hey folks, why don't we move over to the other side of the park, when in my peripheral vision, I see a handful of peanut M&Ms coming at me. So that was very entertaining, and I'm sure that no peanut M&Ms were harmed in that tour that day. I'm sure all those people went home with a wonderful New York City story. Okay, anybody have any more questions before I wrap up? I think I'm going to wrap up in just a few minutes. Oh, but before I do that, let me reiterate. We are free tours by foot. We are all over the world, not just in New York City. We're all over the United States, in DC, in New Orleans, in Chicago. I was really hoping to go to London this summer. I don't know if I'm still going to be able to make it happen, but I hope to get to London someday. Ooh, favorite New York City pizza? Yes. I will interject with that. I have a couple favorites. First of all, of course, you have to go to Grimaldi's or to Giuliana's, like if you're going to sit down and have a pie. The best pizza by the slice is probably Bleecker Street Pizza, but I also really like Nolita Pizza. Bleecker Street Pizza and Nolita Pizza are owned by the same people, and it's the same basic recipe. Bleecker Street Pizza is in Greenwich Village at 7th Avenue South in Bleecker, and Nolita Pizza is on 2nd Avenue at St. Mark's Place, and they're both excellent. So what I would like to say to everybody is, like me, I am not going to cancel my trip to London. I'm just going to postpone it. All of us need to think about just postponing those trips. You know, New York City, we will be here whenever Papa Cuomo says that we can come back out to play. We will be here with bigger bells on than we've ever had on. I cannot wait to get back out there, as I'm sure all of us can't wait to get back out there. Remember, you can buy gift certificates on the Free Tours by Foot website, and those gift certificates will go to support the tour guides who, like me, are unfortunately unable to do our jobs right now. And in fact, I think I mentioned this before, my Venmo website, my Venmo handle down somewhere underneath the video. We're doing this Ask a Tour Guide thing every single Tuesday, and I think a lot of Thursdays as well. Next Tuesday at 2 p.m. Eastern, we're going to be hearing from Jen from Philly. I think that'll be really cool. I've been to Philly many times. That's a really fun city to visit. It's a great, day trip from New York City. So just quickly, I have a couple of recommendations for you if you're interested in New York City history and you want to take like some virtual tours. Architectural Digest has a YouTube channel. Just go to YouTube and look for Architectural Digest. And they have two really, really great virtual tours in New York City. One, oh, my Venmo is not listed. You know what? I don't know what to say. After the tour, I'll make sure that it's put in the comments on the page. How about that? Or you can look for Kathleen/Doherty/6 on Venmo. I lost my train of thought. Oh yes, Architectural Digest. They have a wonderful virtual tour of Grand Central Terminal and one of the New York Public Library's main branch, the one that's on 42nd Street. They really take you all the way through it, and it's narrated by architects who really know what they're talking about. If you're looking for some fun reading, what do I do with it? Here it is. I've had this book for forever, and I finally am cracking it open. The Story of the Irish Mob, and I'm really, really enjoying it. It's making for a titillating read. Well, that's almost all the time that we have together. But before I sign off, I just want to see if I can get Andy to say anything. So let's see if we can get Andy up here. Andy, do you have anything to say? Oh, it's in the event page. Oh, my Venmo handle is in the event page. Thank you very much, whoever posted that. So, Andy, do you have anything to say before we go?
You should just tell me the words and I can just repeat them because I can. I'm so empty today. I can't think of anything. Why don't you just tell me the words and they'll just come out of my mouth?
Well, ladies and gentlemen, the great Andy Warhol. Again, my name is Kathleen, and I'm a tour guide in New York City. Please come and see us in New York City. I can't wait to see you all here. Please, everybody, take good care of yourselves. Take good care of your loved ones. And hang in there because we're going to make it through this. And thank you so much for spending your afternoon with me.